I didn't know a single moment could split a life into before and after. But the morning I woke up to find Daniel gone without a trace carved a line so sharp inside me that even now, years later, I still bleed when I touch it. The strangest part wasn't the silence he left behind. It was how that silence felt rehearsed, like he had been practicing his disappearance long before his body ever left my home. And yet, if you had asked me the night before, I would have sworn I was safe, held, loved, protected even. But pain has a way of hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right second to unmask itself. I remember lying in bed, the sheets still warm from where he had slept, the softness still pressed with the weight of his promise from the night before, the one he whispered as if he was placing eternity in my hands. That he wasn't going anywhere, that I was his future, that he was finally ready to build the life we had been circling for years. I held on to those words the way a child holds a fragile toy, too trusting to imagine it could break. And maybe that's the real tragedy, how easy it is to mistake comfort for truth. That morning when I first opened my eyes, nothing seemed wrong. The dawn through the curtains was gentle, the kind of soft golden light that makes life feel almost forgiving. But forgiveness is only beautiful when you haven't been betrayed yet. The moment my hand reached across the bed and felt cold emptiness instead of his body, something inside me tightened. At first I tried to soothe myself with explanations. Maybe he was in the bathroom, maybe he went downstairs to make tea, maybe he had stepped out to take a call. But the longer I listened, the louder the silence grew. It wasn't the natural quiet of a peaceful house. It was the unnatural stillness of absence, like the air was trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. I remember moving through the house slowly, cautiously, as if rushing would make the truth hit harder. His shoes were gone. His jacket too. His side of the wardrobe looked lighter. Not empty, just relieved of the things he needed most. The kind of selective packing a person does when they leave with intention. My heart began to throb in a way I'd never felt before, not like fear, not like sadness. Something closer to humiliation wrapped in confusion. Bewilderment has a taste, metallic and bitter, and that morning it coated my tongue. I stood in the center of the living room, my mind replaying the night before like a broken record. The way he held me. The softness in his voice. The warmth of his hands. None of it matched the cold disappearance he executed only hours later. And then the questions started, flooding me with the force of a dam breaking. What did I miss? What did I do? Was he pretending the whole time? Or did something happen in the middle of the night that I failed to notice? I tried calling his phone, but it rang twice before switching to voicemail, a sound that felt like an insult disguised as a tone. I tried again. And again. Until my fingers trembled and my chest tightened with a rising panic I could no longer swallow. It wasn't until I opened the drawer in the hallway, the one where we kept spare keys, letters, little things we didn't know where else to put, that I found the first sign that this disappearance was not spontaneous. A letter. Folded carefully. No name on the front. My breath stilled. Something inside me resisted touching it, as if picking it up would solidify the truth my heart was begging me to reject. But I did. With shaking hands I opened it and read the single line he had chosen to leave behind, a line so cruel, so empty, so stripped of accountability that it made my eyes sting. I need space. Don't look for me. That was it. No explanation. No goodbye. No reason. A man I had given years of my life to, a man who had looked me in the eyes and promised forever just hours before, walked away from me with a sentence that felt like a slap delivered with a whisper. For a moment I couldn't move. My knees weakened. My breath grew shallow. The world felt too small to contain the pain expanding inside me. I sank onto the floor, the letter clutched in my hand like a weapon I never saw coming. And then the memories attacked, fast and merciless. The first time he told me he loved me. The nights we spent dreaming about children and a house and the future that now mocked me. The hope I had poured into him with both hands, thinking that love, real love, couldn't change its mind overnight. But apparently his could. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to beg. But the deepest part, the one I didn't know existed until that moment, felt something colder and more terrifying. Shame. Not because he left, but because I had trusted him so blindly. Pain doesn't just break you, it rewrites you. And that morning the rewriting began. I spent the next hours pacing the house like a ghost haunting my own life, looking for signs, clues, anything that explained why my forever had suddenly expired. But the truth was simple, he had planned it. Maybe not that exact day, but the leaving was deliberate. calculated, hidden behind affection. The realization wrapped around my chest like a tightening rope. I didn't cry at first. The shock was too heavy. It numbed everything. But later, when the sun began to set and the house turned darker and colder, the tears finally came. Not soft tears. Not graceful tears. The kind of tears that shake the body, pull at the soul, and leave you gasping. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the letter on the table, the silence louder than thunder, and one thought echoed through me. If love can vanish without warning, then what does that say about the people we let into our hearts? The grief came in waves. Memories crashing into confusion, confusion collapsing into sorrow, sorrow choking into anger. But underneath it all was something even more dangerous. The beginning of distrust. Not just of him, of myself. Because how do you forgive yourself for not seeing the storm when the sky looked clear? I didn't sleep that night. My mind replayed every moment with him, searching for signs I missed. And as dawn approached, I made a decision, not out of strength but out of exhaustion. I needed to know why. He owed me that. Even if he didn't think so. Even if he ran. Even if the truth would hurt more than the silence. I wasn't going to let his disappearance become a wound I accepted without understanding. And as the first light hit the window, a new emotion took root inside the bruises. An emotion sharper than pain, deeper than betrayal, determination. But I didn't know that searching for the truth would lead me somewhere far darker than I imagined. Because sometimes the truth doesn't heal. Sometimes it destroys. And that was the part one wasn't ready for. That was the part waiting for me next. I didn't expect the second morning without him to feel even heavier than the first, but grief has a strange way of expanding, filling every corner of your chest until breathing feels like lifting a mountain. And that morning as I stood in my kitchen staring at the untouched mug he used every day, a sudden thought drifted through me, sharp and uninvited. What if he didn't disappear because of me, but because of something he was hiding long before he ever whispered love into my ears? That thought lodged itself inside me like a thorn I couldn't pull out, and the more I tried to ignore it, the deeper it pushed, forcing me to move, to search, to stop pretending his disappearance was just an act of emotional cowardice and not something rooted in secrets I never knew existed. I started with the small things, the everyday things, the things you overlook because routine convinces you that familiarity equals truth. His shirts were gone, yes, but not all of them. Only the newer ones, the ones he bought in the last 6 months. His wallet was missing, but his old passport was still in the drawer. His expensive watch, the one he claimed he cherished because it was a gift from a late uncle, was still in its box, untouched. It didn't make sense. Why take the things that meant nothing and leave behind the things he claimed held memories? The more I looked, the more answers slipped away from me like smoke. His laptop, normally on the desk, wasn't there. But the charger was. His toiletries were gone, but his cologne, a scent he wore almost every day, still sat on the shelf. Little contradictions that felt like breadcrumbs scattered by someone who wanted me to look but not fully see. Maybe that was what frightened me the most. How intentional everything seemed. It didn't feel like a man running away from responsibility. It felt like a man running away from something much bigger, something he didn't want touching me. But then another voice inside me whispered something far colder, something that stung my pride in a way I wasn't prepared for. Maybe he just didn't think I was worth a goodbye. That thought hit me like cold water thrown over my heart, and suddenly I found myself sitting on the floor again, the same floor where I broke the day before, this time with my back against the cabinet, my knees tucked to my chest, trying to steady my breathing against the rising wave of humiliation. How do you process abandonment when the person who abandoned you leaves behind more questions than love? I stayed there for a long time, letting the questions swirl in circles, until one memory rose above the rest. Something small, something I had forgotten until that very moment. 3 weeks earlier, I had woken up in the middle of the night and found him sitting in the living room, staring at the wall like he was listening to something only he could hear. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me he couldn't sleep and didn't want to disturb me. His voice had been unusually soft, too soft, like a man trying to hide cracks forming beneath the surface. At the time, I believed him because love makes you trust the tone instead of the truth. But now, sitting alone in that same room, I replayed that night with a different lens and something inside me twisted. He wasn't just awake. He was afraid. Not afraid of me, not afraid of us. Afraid of something else, something I hadn't seen, something he had been carrying alone. The thought made my heart skip, and that was the moment I decided I needed to check the one place I had always respected as his private corner. the small black notebook he kept inside the bottom drawer of the TV stand. He never told me not to touch it, but he never invited me to either. It was simply there, always closed, always in the same place, a quiet boundary between us. I hesitated before opening the drawer, my hand trembling as if the notebook itself was a living thing that could change my world with one flip of its pages. And in a way it did. When I finally pulled it out, the notebook felt heavier than I expected, as if the weight of his secrets had somehow seeped into the pages. The cover was slightly worn and the edges bent, a sign that he used it often. I opened it slowly, bracing myself, not for betrayal but for understanding. The first page was blank. The second too. But on the third page his handwriting appeared, neat and deliberate. Not love letters. Not poems. Not dreams. Dates. Times. Locations. Short cryptic notes that looked more like surveillance records than personal thoughts. One line caught my attention immediately. 9:14 p.m. She doesn't know I saw him again. I froze. She doesn't know I saw him again. My mind began racing. Who was him? Who was he seeing without telling me? And what did again mean? I turned the page. More notes. More fragments. Call from withheld number. He said they're watching. I need to protect her. If anything happens, she must never know. My breath caught in my throat. A cold shiver ran through me, settling heavy in my stomach. This wasn't a man planning to leave a relationship. This was a man tangled in something dark, dangerous, hidden, something he had kept entirely separate from the life he built with me. I flipped through page after page, my heart pounding faster with each cryptic entry. The last entry stopped me completely. If I disappear, it's the only way to keep her alive. My entire body went still. The room suddenly felt colder. The air too quiet. I reread the line over and over, my eyes burning with disbelief. Was he protecting me? Or was he lying even here, even in his private thoughts? A new wave of fear washed over me, this time not just emotional but physical. What danger was he talking about? Who was him? And why did he think disappearing would save me? Before I could process any of it, something else caught my attention. Something that made my heart nearly stop. The notebook wasn't full. Behind the last written entry was a folded piece of paper tucked into the back pocket. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It was a printed photo. Grainy. Dark. Taken at night. And in the photo, Daniel stood beside a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hood. Their faces were close, too close, as if they were arguing or exchanging something. My chest tightened painfully as I stared at it. The street looked unfamiliar. But the timestamp on the corner of the image was unmistakable. The photo was taken 2 nights before he disappeared. My breath grew shallow, sweaty, uneasy. And then, on the back of the photo, written in hurried, shaky handwriting, were 4 words I wish I never saw. He found me again. The room seemed to tilt. My pulse hammered against my ribs. That single sentence changed everything. Daniel didn't just leave me. He was running from someone. Someone who had found him. Someone who forced him into silence. As I sat there holding the notebook in one hand and the photograph in the other, I felt my heartbeat shift. From heartbreak to something sharper, something fueled not by loss but by dread. And yet, before fear could fully swallow me, another emotion sparked beneath the surface, quiet but undeniable. A determination I didn't know I had. Because if Daniel thought I would stay in the dark, if he thought he could vanish to protect me without giving me the truth, he underestimated the very woman he claimed to love. I wiped my tears, placed the photo on the table, and whispered something I didn't even realize I meant until the moment the words formed in my mind. I'm going to find him. But as I reached for my phone, ready to call someone, anyone, to help me piece this together, something happened that stopped me cold. Something so quiet and yet so terrifying it sent a chill climbing up my spine. The doorknob of my front door moved. Not loudly. Just a small, subtle, undeniable twist. Someone was on the other side. Someone who hadn't knocked. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. And in that split second, a truth hit me harder than any heartbreak. Whatever Daniel was running from had finally reached my door. The sudden movement of the doorknob froze me mid-breath. My body so taut I could feel the tension in my fingers curling around the edge of the table as if gripping it harder could keep the world from falling apart. And in that instant, every rational thought I had about who could be there evaporated, leaving only the pure, raw pulse of fear. The street outside was quiet, as if the world itself had paused to watch what was about to happen inside my home. And yet inside the air felt heavy, saturated with a presence I couldn't yet name but knew instinctively I was meant to fear. My phone sat on the counter, a useless weight that seemed to mock my hesitation, and I realized too late that I wasn't thinking about calling anyone. There was no one to call. Not really. Because whoever had found Daniel had found me too, and the protective illusions of the life we had imagined together were dissolving like smoke in the wind. I slowly, cautiously approached the door, my bare feet silent against the cold wooden floor, and as I raised my hand to peek through the peephole, a thought struck me that made my stomach twist with both dread and guilt. Daniel must have known this would happen, and perhaps this is exactly why he left, why he disappeared without explanation. The sound of the knob rattling again, so subtle but deliberate, made me jump slightly, and I instinctively took a step back, knocking over a chair in the process, its clatter echoing unnaturally in the stillness, a sound I prayed would alert whoever, or whatever, was outside that I wasn't alone but also betray nothing of my panic. And then just as I braced to scream, the knob stopped moving. Silence reclaimed the house, heavy and pressing, and for a moment, I thought it might have been my imagination, the product of grief and paranoia, until I saw the shadow stretching across the floor beneath the door, dark and impossibly long, as if it had a presence beyond the physical. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of knowledge I barely had time to organize. Daniel's cryptic notes, the photo of him with the hooded figure, the hurried warnings in his notebook, the way he had spoken in hushed tones during the last weeks before he vanished. All of it pointed to a reality I had been unable or unwilling to accept until now. He was not just running from something ordinary. This was bigger, darker, more dangerous than I had imagined. The shadow moved subtly, almost lazily, but I knew it was deliberate, patient, watching me the way a predator watches prey, and my body reacted before my mind could fully process, stepping back slowly, every nerve screaming for me to hide, to vanish, to erase my presence from the floorboards. But I couldn't. I had no choice. Fear and determination had intertwined inside me, forming a strange, sharp clarity that left no room for hesitation. I needed to understand. I needed to see. I needed to know what Daniel had gotten himself entangled in. And if that meant facing whatever, or whoever, was outside my door, then I would. My hand hovered over the doorknob again, but before I could turn it, the floorboards creaked behind me. Another sound. Another subtle signal that I was not alone in the house. My heart leaped, a mixture of hope and terror, because the noise came from the direction of the hallway leading to the bedroom where Daniel's scent still lingered in the sheets, in the pillows, in the fabric of the mattress. And I realized then that the presence at my door might not even be the primary threat. Someone, or something, was already inside. My mind flashed to all the notes in his notebook, all the cryptic warnings, the repeated entries about being watched, about needing to protect me. What had he known? How long had he known it? And why hadn't he told me? Rage and sorrow mingled in my chest, hot and suffocating, making my hands shake violently as I gripped the edge of the counter for support. And then I saw it. A subtle movement from the corner of the hallway near the staircase. Too fast to be natural, but deliberate enough to be noticed by the trained eye of someone who had been warned, someone who had read the signs too late. I froze. My breath caught. The hairs on my arms and neck rose like I was being electrocuted by anticipation, fear, and disbelief all at once. The shadow at the door began to shift again, moving slightly to the left, a subtle but unmistakable presence signaling awareness. And my stomach twisted into knots as I realized the simplest, most terrifying truth. This person knew I had discovered the notebook. They knew I had seen the photo. And that meant, beyond all doubt, that my curiosity had just painted a target on my back. I wanted to flee, to bolt, to disappear, but my body refused, locked in place by a mixture of adrenaline and a strange, stubborn will to survive. I had spent months imagining how I would react to Daniel leaving, imagining sorrow, heartbreak, maybe even quiet revenge. But this was nothing I had prepared for, nothing I could anticipate. This was real, immediate, and it demanded action before my thoughts could form coherent strategies. The shadow moved again, slow this time, deliberate, almost taunting, and I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that I had seconds, maybe less, to decide. I took a deep breath, the kind that stings your lungs and shakes your diaphragm, and stepped back toward the side door, planning to escape into the alley, planning to run and think and survive long enough to find him. But just as my hand reached for the handle, the power in the house cut out. Darkness swallowed the living room, the kitchen, the hall, leaving only the faint glow of morning light spilling through the curtains. My eyes strained, my ears straining to catch every subtle sound, every whisper of movement. The floorboards groaned again, closer this time. And then a voice, low and controlled, drifted through the shadows, carrying an authority that made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't have opened the notebook." The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight, a threat, a promise. My knees buckled. My mind screamed, but I couldn't move. And then, without warning, the shadow outside the door vanished. The doorknob stopped rattling. The stillness returned, heavier than before, pressing in on me with an almost physical weight. I sank to the floor, my back against the counter, chest heaving, realizing that I had just glimpsed the edge of something much larger than heartbreak or abandonment. This was danger. Real danger. Something Daniel had known was coming, and he had left me in the path of it anyway. And in that moment, as I sat in near darkness, the notebook and photograph clutched to my chest, my mind raced with one terrible realization. The moment I decide to find him, I am stepping into a world he never allowed me to see. A world filled with shadows, secrets, and forces that do not forgive mistakes. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the pounding of my heart and the ache of betrayal, another thought burned brighter than ever. I cannot turn back. Not now. Not when the first trace of truth is in my hands. Because if Daniel disappeared to protect me, then it is up to me to uncover why. And if I fail, I might never see him again. Or worse, I might never see myself survive. The night after the shadow vanished, I barely slept, every creak of the house a drumbeat reminding me that I was alone, that Daniel's absence had left not just a hollow space in the bed, but a vacuum of truth I was desperate to fill. And yet the deeper I tried to dive into his secrets, the more I realized that his life, my life, had been a veneer of normality over something vast, dangerous, and unknowable. I paced the living room again, the notebook and the photo spread in front of me like a puzzle I was afraid to solve, and my mind worked tirelessly, scanning every line, every cryptic message, every date, every coded phrase he had left behind. Why did he leave? Who had found him? And what had he been hiding from me that was so perilous it required him to disappear completely? I kept returning to the photograph, analyzing the man standing beside him, the indistinct street, the timestamp. It was like staring into a fragment of another life, one that belonged entirely outside the relationship we had built, one that was real and threatening and utterly incomprehensible to me. My pulse throbbed as I flipped the notebook back to the earliest entries, tracing his handwriting as if the shape of the letters themselves might hold a clue, and I noticed patterns I hadn't seen before. Dates clustered around nights, repeated references to numbers, locations, sometimes names only partially written, sometimes initials. It wasn't just a journal, it was a map. A map of his movements, of the dangers circling him, and perhaps, of the paths I would have to follow if I wanted to find him and understand the truth. But there was also a subtle warning in every line, something I felt more than read. A sense that he was always one step ahead of the danger and I was not. That realization sharpened the fear in my chest, but it also stirred a deep, unyielding determination, a stubborn refusal to remain passive. If he had vanished to protect me, then I would follow. I would uncover what had been hidden. I would survive whatever this was. The morning was gray and still when I decided to leave the house for the first time since he disappeared, taking only the notebook, the photograph, and a small bag of essentials. I had no clear plan, only a direction. The streets of my neighborhood were familiar, comforting in their ordinariness, yet they felt alien under the weight of the secrets I now carried, as if the world itself had shifted while I slept. Every person I passed seemed unknowable, every shadow suspicious, every whisper in the wind a potential signal. I found myself returning repeatedly to the same thought. Daniel had built a life with me, but he had also built another life without me, and the edges of that other life were fraying in ways that could consume us both. I retraced his last known movements using the notebook as my guide, traveling to places I had never noticed before, corners of London that were both familiar and alien, the air thick with the smell of rain-soaked streets and exhaust, the smell of city life that seemed indifferent to the storm erupting inside me. At a small cafe, I found one entry from his notes, a date and time followed by the initials LC. I asked the barista if she had seen him or anyone matching that description, but she shook her head, eyes wary, as if I were the kind of person whose questions carried trouble. My gut clenched. Every answer I sought led only to more questions, and each dead end tightened the spiral of dread and curiosity that had taken over my life. I spent hours walking through streets, leaning over notebook pages, cross-referencing entries, trying to decode hidden meanings, while the sky darkened and the chill of early evening crept into my bones. At one point, I ducked into an alley to consult the notebook in secret, away from passers-by, and my fingers traced a line that read, "If I disappear, do not follow blindly. They watch for the desperate." The word struck me like a blow. Daniel had anticipated my reaction. He had foreseen my insistence, my determination, my refusal to let go, and he had warned me not to follow blindly. And yet I knew I couldn't stop. Not when a piece of him, and perhaps my own safety, was hidden in the patterns of his notes. My eyes lifted to the end of the alley, and in the fading light, I noticed a figure, standing there half hidden in shadow, observing. My first instinct was to run, to flee back to the safety of my apartment, but something inside me, something more than fear, kept me rooted. The figure stepped slightly forward, just enough for me to catch the edge of a hooded jacket, and then retreated behind a corner. I felt my heart hammering, my thoughts racing. Was this someone connected to Daniel's secrets, or someone entirely new? And yet, something about the movement felt deliberate, like a test, a signal, a warning. I followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen, tracing the path indicated in the notebook, turning corners, passing under street lamps that flickered weakly in the damp air, my eyes never leaving the faint outline of the figure ahead. And then, suddenly, the figure disappeared into a narrow passageway, leaving no trace, no sound, no clue except the emptiness that now pressed against my senses like a weight. I stood there for long moments, my mind racing. Every scenario spun out, every fear crystallized, every possibility more terrifying than the last. But I couldn't turn back. I had come too far, and the notebook had become more than paper and ink. It was now a lifeline, a connection to Daniel, to the truth, to the answers I desperately needed. I moved cautiously, following the next set of instructions I interpreted from the notes, heading to an address I had never known existed. A building tucked into the shadows between two high-rise apartments, dark, imposing, unmarked. I paused outside, the street empty, the wind whispering coldly past my face, and I realized with a sudden clarity that I was standing on the threshold of a world Daniel had tried to shield me from. A world I had ignored because it was easier to believe in love than in danger. But now, standing there, the adrenaline pulsing through my veins, I understood something I had not realized in my grief-stricken naivety. Finding him would not be about love alone. It would be about survival, about deciphering the truth from lies, about navigating shadows that could consume me whole. And as I pushed open the heavy door, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing in from every side, I had no idea what awaited me inside, whether I would find Daniel, answers, or something darker entirely. But I knew with certainty that the path he had left behind, the trail of secrets, was about to reveal more than I had ever bargained for. And just as I stepped over the threshold, the sound of footsteps echoed from the floor above, deliberate, slow, and inescapable. Someone was waiting. Someone was watching. And whatever was up there, whatever Daniel had tried to protect me from, was aware that I had arrived. I froze at the top of the staircase, every nerve screaming, every heartbeat pounding like a drum inside my chest as the footsteps above me stopped, leaving only silence that was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. And in that moment I realized that this was no longer just about finding Daniel or understanding why he had vanished. It was about confronting a reality so jagged, so perilous, that it threatened to consume every piece of the life I had thought I knew. The corridor above stretched like a tunnel into uncertainty, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb that threw long shadows across the walls, and I felt my fingers clutching the notebook so tightly that the paper crumpled slightly under my grip. Its cryptic notes now more than a guide. They were a lifeline. Every step I took toward the upper floor was measured, careful, like walking on ice that could break at any second, and as I ascended, memories of Daniel, the soft warmth of his hand, the promises whispered in bed, the laughter we shared on rainy afternoons, collided violently with the mounting dread of the unknown, creating a storm in my chest that left me breathless and trembling. I remembered the last cryptic note I had read. If I disappear, do not follow blindly. They watch for the desperate. And yet here I was, consumed by the desperate need to know, to find him, to understand. I rounded the corner and there he was, or rather a fragment of him. Daniel sat in a chair at the end of the hall, his face pale, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear, the lines of worry etched into his features deeper than anything I had noticed in the warmth of our home. Beside him, the hooded figure from the photograph stepped into the light, revealing not a stranger, but a man I immediately recognized from old photographs Daniel had shown me long ago, a friend, or perhaps a warning figure in the tangled world Daniel had been forced into. The man's eyes locked on mine, assessing, weighing, like he was measuring whether I belonged in this story or if my presence would destroy everything. My chest tightened, my throat dry, my fingers trembling as I stepped closer, the notebook still clutched to my chest, carrying the weight of his secrets, his life, and the growing danger I now realized surrounded both of us. Daniel rose slowly, his gaze flicking between me and the man, his lips moving, forming words I could not yet hear, and then finally he spoke, his voice raw and unguarded, telling me everything he had hidden. The life he had led in the shadows, the people who had forced him to vanish, the threats that had stalked him for months, the compromises he had made to protect me without telling me, the lies he had spun to keep the world from touching the fragile pieces of us he had tried to preserve. My mind reeled at the enormity of it, at the depth of his deception and the courage it had taken to disappear entirely. And as the story unfolded, I felt the betrayal and relief intertwine in a way I had never imagined possible. But there was no time to linger in relief or anger, because the moment he finished speaking, the air in the room shifted. The man beside him, the one who had always lurked in the edges of Daniel's secret life, moved toward us with a deliberate, controlled threat, and I realized that the danger had never been distant. It had been here all along, lurking beneath the surface, and now it demanded attention. My heart surged with a mixture of terror and clarity. The notebook, the photograph, the choices I had made to follow Daniel into this hidden world, they all converged into a single realization. Survival depended on action, on courage, on a refusal to be a passive player in a story that had once been written for me without my consent. And in that instant, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a fierce determination not just to survive, but to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from me. I stepped forward, confronting the figure, confronting the danger, confronting the fear that had paralyzed me for so long, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath, the walls closing in with suspense so thick I could taste it on my tongue. Daniel's eyes met mine, and in them I saw relief, fear, and hope, a complicated mix that mirrored my own feelings. The hooded man paused, studying us, and then slowly withdrew, leaving only a whispered warning. "This isn't over." But even as the threat receded, the room still thrummed with the aftershocks of everything we had uncovered, and I realized that our lives, though forever altered, were no longer dictated solely by secrets and shadows. The notebook still rested in my hands, the photograph lying on the floor, but the weight felt different now. Not just a burden of fear, but a reminder of what had been endured and what could still be protected. Daniel reached for me, and I allowed him to touch my hand, but I kept my mind alert, aware that trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, cautiously, like a fragile plant in cracked soil. The night stretched on as we sat together, quietly sharing details of his hidden life, his battles, his compromises, the threats he had faced, and the painstaking choices he had made to keep me safe. And yet, even in that quiet, I understood that healing would not be immediate, that forgiveness would take time, and that the shadow of fear might always linger at the edges of our lives. By dawn, we had crafted a plan, a cautious strategy to navigate the lingering threats, to re-establish boundaries, to survive. And yet I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that the journey ahead would demand everything of us, that the world Daniel had shielded me from would not forget so easily, and that I would have to summon strength from places I had never known existed. And even as the sun rose, painting the room in a soft, pale light, I could feel the lingering pull of secrets still unspoken, dangers still unseen, and the fragile threads of trust that we had begun to weave together. My mind wandered to the moment I first realized he had disappeared, the pain that had carved lines across my heart, the confusion that had kept me awake, the determination that had forced me to follow. And now, sitting in the aftermath of revelation, holding his hand lightly in mine, I understood that the story wasn't over. It had simply transformed. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet, unshakable resolve took root, that I would survive, that I would heal, that I would reclaim the life that had been stolen from me, not just by Daniel's disappearance, but by the shadows that had sought to control him and through him me. I knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but I also knew that having faced the worst of betrayal, abandonment, and fear, I now carried a power I hadn't recognized before, A clarity born of suffering, of surviving, of refusing to be broken. And as I looked at Daniel, finally visible, finally real, finally reachable, I realized that our story, though scarred, though shadowed, could continue, but it would never be the same. We had been tested by lies, by danger, by absence, but what remained was real. The choice to move forward together, cautiously, deliberately, and with eyes wide open. And yet, just as I allowed myself to breathe, just as I let the first fragile threads of relief settle, a soft, almost imperceptible click came from the window behind us, a sound so quiet it could have been ignored, but I heard it and my heart skipped, because I knew with certainty that the dangers had not vanished, that shadows still lingered, that the night was far from over, and that the final lesson of survival had yet to reveal itself, waiting just beyond the thin veil of safety we had claimed in that moment. And I whispered to myself, a vow against fear and betrayal alike. I will face it. I will endure. I will live. Please follow me for no reason.